Welcome back to our podcast, Regulation Matters, a Clear Conversation. Once again, I'm your host, Lyon Dempsey, and I am currently the Chief Compliance Officer with Riccobeni Associates Family Dentistry here in North Carolina. I'm also the chair of CLEAR's National Certified Investigator Training Committee. As many of you are aware, the Council on Licensure, Enforcement, and Regulation, or CLEAR, is an association of individuals, agencies, and organizations that comprise the international community of professional and occupational regulation. This podcast is an opportunity for you to hear about the important topics in our regulatory community. With today's episode, we want to acknowledge the important contribution of two CLEAR members. Joining us today, we have Steve Nettles and Jim Zukowski, who have recently stepped down from a long tenure on the editorial board for the CLEAR Exam Review Journal. So we thank you for your service and dedication over the years, and we're super glad to have you with us today. So welcome.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, likewise. This is it's quite an opportunity to review 30 years.
Absolutely. Well, we are super glad to speak with you, and also let me thank our listeners for joining us today. You know, I hope our listeners have had a chance to benefit from the CLEAR Exam Review. I know I have over the years, but let me kind of set the stage for our discussion today. You know, the CLEAR Exam Review is a biannual journal that has useful discussions on current licensing examination issues. You know, and it's geared towards our CLEAR to our broad audience that we have at CLEAR. Going back to the CLEAR archives, the journal began actually in the 1980s with its precursor. It was then called the National Clearinghouse on Examination Information. Then 1990 was the first issue of our CLEAR Exam Review. And Steve, you joined the editorial board with Volume 3, Number 1 in the winter of 1992. And Jim, I understand you joined in the winter of 1994. So take us back, if you will, kind of to those beginnings and maybe how you first got involved. And let me start with Steve first, and then we'll go to Jim. So bring us up to speed.
Okay. Well, thank you, Lyon. I had to remember back, it's quite a few years, but at that time, when I first heard about CLEAR, I was working at Educational Testing Service, and in real close to my office was Ben Schimberg. And Ben, as you know, is a kingpin in the formation of CLEAR to begin with. So between Ben and my boss at that time, Mike Rosenfeld, they encouraged participation in CLEAR. And when I left ETS and started working with, at that time, Applied Measurement Professionals, which is now PSI, in the late 80s, I started going to CLEAR meetings. And it was, I enjoyed the opportunity that was there with to work with colleagues in the credentialing testing industry and get a different slant from the regulators within the CLEAR organization.
Well, my first initial outing with CLEAR began back in the 80s. I had just moved in from being at the University of Texas, and I started with the Texas Department of State Health Services. And I started initially dealing with the Emergency Medical Services licensure and testing program. And shortly I became involved with the Professional and Licensing Division and Certification Division for the Texas Department of Health, and it included a wide array of licensing programs. And my boss had attended one of the first CLEAR conferences that was organized, and when he came back and he said, "Jim, you need to start getting involved in this organization. They do have a track that involves the examination section." So I first started attending the CLEAR conferences when they were in Orlando. I think it was back in the late 80s, and have been trying to go to CLEAR ever since then. And the Examination Resources and Advisory Committee has been a real blessing for me because I had a chance to experience dialogue with a variety of people from a variety of services in a variety of states, and I met Steve through CLEAR, and people like Kara Schmid and Barb Showers and our friends in the state of Colorado and the national testing services such as ETS with Mike Rosenfeld and some of the other people just got me actively involved in the organization. And I learned so much in terms of how to deal with the examination components of the regulatory programs that I was in charge of.
It's quite a lot of history between the two of you guys, and I know you've seen a lot of changes over the years. I guess what would you say some of the biggest changes and maybe innovations that you've seen, in the testing industry since then? And I know it's probably fairly big. Jim, let's start with you on that.
Well, I think the biggest change has been going from a strictly pencil and paper examination program to computer-based testing. And
Absolutely.
I remember and I first remember when I was with the Emergency Medical Services program, we did Scantron sheets, and we didn't even have the ability to grade, the written examination. So we had to contract with the University of Texas and take all of our examination sheets over there and get them graded through their mainline computer. And that's how it started. And over the years, we've just gone through computer-based testing, and it's been a godsend. I know there's some initial costs, but it's helped us examine more people through a wide variety of venues, and has made the whole examination process a lot easier in terms of manpower.
Steve?
Well, yeah, I'll start with the changes, and there's sort of the changes and innovations, there's some overlap. But for me, one of my jobs before I came to ETS was working for the federal government, and I was in charge of grants for a 5-state area in the Mid-Atlantic region. One of my jobs was when the uniform guidelines came out on employment testings from the Department of Labor, Department of Justice, and the Civil Service Commission. It was 1978, and I had the wonderful job of training people on or training personnel departments in those states on the uniform guidelines. And when they first came out, there was controversy whether or not they applied to credentialing exam. And finally, I think everybody agreed it did. So to me, the big change was now credentialing exams were held to the same standards and requirements that employment testings were held to, employment tests were held to. And the big change for me was when I first started working with clients, is a lot of the clients that we're developing exams for had never done a job analysis, and that was one of the basic requirements. It also targeted things besides job analysis or practice analysis, but you couldn't just come up with a passing score. You had to do a passing score studies. There was a lot of discussion about content validity and other types of validity, and whether empirical validity studies applied or whether content validity were sufficient. And for the most part, content validity was used to support the validity of the exams. And because of that, there was a lot of documentation requirements that gradually evolved over the years, and especially in the 80s and as it got improved in the 90s. So that, to me, that was a big change. Is now we had requirements we had to meet, and you could be legally responsible for that. Hopefully you never did, because that was one of the most unenjoyable activities as being an expert witness in support of an examination. But
right.
the innovations, I agree with Jim. The big one was CBT, but I would take it back a step earlier to the computers. When I first switched over in the 80s and changed jobs to work with AMP, we had what we called a mid-frame, and then we had a personal computer. We're just breaking the news then. And as they got more and more powerful, we got to apply some of the more complicated testing models to go along with us. And the first one I remember was item banking in my very first career. That was back in the state of Illinois, back in the 70s, when we were doing civil service testing. We had card files, and each card had an item on it. When you wanted to develop a test, you would assemble a page of the test with the cards and take a photocopy of it.
Oh, Lord.
Oh yeah, we had thousands of
Wow.
cards. It was horrible. But that was nice when the first application we did was item banking on the computer. So it was nice to have the items there, and especially it made the tests look real nice when you could print them out and make copies that way. The other thing I noticed is the innovations were passing score studies were pretty much non-existent, or they were done on the old method of was a relative standard, a statistical standard, where they use the general rules like a 1 standard error or a half a standard error below the mean. And it took a while to convince many of my clients that this was not a good way to do it. And we gradually got them into more of the newer ones, Angoff, and later on Angoff continued to be very popular, but there were some new methods introduced. And then the innovations over the years, as I looked at the 20 or 30 years of abstracts in the CER, I noticed there was a lot of talk about item innovations as computers were allowing us to do stuff. We did videos and automated item generation. I never did the automated item generation. I thought that was a little difficult to do for the type of clients I had. But it evolved, and then as candidates will be candidates, as things happened and the CBT came out, the cheating got more and more popular. So there was a constant battle between the cheaters and the test providers. And then the last thing, I think the innovating thing that I noticed was there's more and more talk about continuing competence assessment in the later years, and how, yeah, you were licensed once, and 20 or 30 years later, what do you remember? I probably could have used some continuing competence as I got later on in my career, but those are some of the things that I brought up that I think were the changes and the innovations.
Right, that makes good sense, but it kind of leads to obviously some challenges that were overcome thanks to technology as things improved along the way. I guess looking back, and Steve, if you'll continue, kind of what were some of the biggest challenges that the testing industry has actually faced, in your opinion?
Yeah, and then they sort of, as you said, they sort of overlap with the innovations as we innovated more and started implementing the CBT exams. Of course, the candidates evolved, and you can call it test security, or I like to call it candidate misbehavior, improved. So it was a constant battle about who was going to maintain the validity of exams. But surrogates was a big issue in both paper and pencil and CBT, and some of the biometric standards helped us work with the surrogates. Item harvesting was always a problem with the group of candidates memorizing items. They could do it on paper and pencil before we did CBT, and then there was a push to do it on CBT, but they got more clever and started using more sophisticated technologies, little tiny cameras, and it was a constant battle trying to figure out what's the next thing we're going to have to fight against, especially as spy, quote unquote, spy technology became more and more available on the internet. And then as more and more state organizations started using national or multi-state exams, that created an issue where we would have to include a lot bigger sample in our job analysis and practice analysis, and try to find commonalities among the states that everybody could agree on that should be on the test. So we had a lot of interesting discussions about that. A little bit of the international exam development. It was popular for a while. I guess it still is. I worked with it a little bit with mainly Canadian companies and the French Canadians and the translations. That became an issue, and then couldn't just do a straight translation, and there was a whole bunch of research and technology improvements to get higher quality translations. Then I think it was maybe in the 90s or early 2000s, there's a big push for innovative item types and how to get those into your exams and how do they mix with, if you were still using multiple choice questions, how that all fit together, and the OSCEs, the practical exams, sometimes mixed. Yeah, Jim, you're familiar with those. And you
I'm
can
very
elaborate.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
could
can
I
elaborate.
could I elaborate on those practice exams? One of the challenges that we had over in Texas was the practical exam for massage therapists, and the laws as they existed in the state at that time required us to do a written as well as a practical examination to licensed massage therapists in the state of Texas. And first of all, we had to overcome the stigma of what actually was a massage therapist. And through a lot of education, we finally convinced the communities that this was a legitimate occupation. And our committees stressed the fact that we needed to do a practical examination to test whether or not these people can actually do the different kinds of massage techniques, as well as administer a written examination. And we worked in partnership with Steve's organization, Applied Measurement Professionals, and we did actually administer a practical examination whereby a candidate would go into the room, they would have a massage table and a client, and the session, which was very short, was videotaped. And once the sessions were videotaped, it would go back to a separate room that had a bunch of skill examiners in it that they would review the tapes, and we would get at least three reviews of each videotape before it was decided whether or not that person actually practiced the examination according to criteria that were pre-established about what constitute acceptable performance of a particular massage therapy technique. And this was extremely labor intensive. We had to contract with various hotels to get the hotel space so that we could strip down hotel rooms and put in massage therapy tables and do the videotaping. And we used to do that 3 times a year, and it just wore us out. And we had to do it on the weekends, and we would test hundreds in each session. And thank God they finally abolished the practical examination, went strictly with the national examination, which certainly cleared a lot of the anxiety and a lot of the work involved in administering the examination component for that particular program. So I can only remember some of the horrors that happened during some of those sessions that went on, but that was part of the challenges we faced in the testing industry at that particular point in time.
I thought for sure you were going to say that you volunteered to have the massage done.
Well, in some cases we had to, because either they couldn't find a model or something happened in the particular model that we're going to use sometimes wasn't available, or a lot of times we would have 2 massage therapy candidates just rotate back and forth, being the actually client as well as the practitioner. So it worked out better that way. But it was a challenge, that's for sure, but it was successful.
Nice. Well, I guess, Jim, if you had a crystal ball in front of you, what do you see for the future for testing and the testing industry itself?
Well, I think the direction is going more towards internet-based testing, and I have some reservations about the security involved in all of that. But
sure.
I think in terms of conducting the examination component quickly, affordable, and provide the means to assess the competence and achieve the results within a very short period of time, I think that's the way it goes for the future. I can't think of anything else that would be as technology advanced for us to go into another direction to do. Otherwise, I can't think of anything else except go back to some traditional approaches to testing. But I don't think the testing industry would support that. So that's the way I think it's going.
And I'd like to elaborate on Jim's topic about the online testing. To me, I'm not a big fan of it either. The proctoring issue has always been something that could never feel real comfortable with. But one of the more practical topics I think was brought up in a couple of CLEAR meetings was the interfaces for online test administrations. And everybody is at home taking the test on their own equipment. They all have different equipment. And does the interface work the same? And one of the basic tenets of valid test scoring is that there's commonality, that everybody has the same experience. And I wasn't convinced that you will, but I could be showing my age there. But in terms of there's one other thing I wanted to mention about challenges was when ADA jumped in and it made the whole accommodations issue, and that gets back to the commonality of testing, because there's if you have a candidate with disabilities, you needed to provide possibly extra time or a different format for people with visual disabilities. So again, that's going to be a continuing problem, I think. But I'm going to go way out on the future of the testing industry. I think as artificial intelligence adapts and comes in, and this, maybe 20, 30 years out, or it may never happen. That's why I won't be here, so it won't matter. But and the other one I was thinking about that would be really neat is virtual reality. A long time ago when I was working, I can't remember where it was, but we were developing an examination for people that take calls and emergency calls for the police department and fire departments. And we set up a little thing that in one channel they had to listen to headphones. In one ear, they would be the people calling in, and the other ear would be other complications from other apps. So the controller, I can't remember exactly the name of the position, but the people that handle those calls had to be, listen with both ears to two different things. And virtual reality would make that a lot easier now. You could put the person in the vignette, sort of like some of these police simulations or the military going into a burnt out or a bombed building in some other country and trying to find terrorists, and what's your first reaction, and do you shoot, or is it a civilian, or is it a terrorist? So I think virtual reality may come into that in the future.
I think the pandemic has also brought to light the industry of certainly some of the testing programs I'm dealing with right now, is the fact that because so many businesses and industries have been affected by the pandemic, that it's going to force us to go back and take a look at some of the job descriptions that have been traditional for many of the occupational programs. I'm dealing with the people who are in the food service industry. And in Texas, thousands of establishments have just closed because of the pandemic. And those that have remained open with limited seating capacity, employees have just learned to take on so many additional skills and responsibilities that really, when you actually talk to them in terms of what they thought they were going into versus what they're actually doing, are two separate things. So I think a lot of the testing groups are going to have to go back and get consensus on what actually are some of the new job responsibilities for a certain class of occupations.
Yeah,
that's a great point.
That'll be interesting. Yeah, that's COVID sort of threw a monkey wrench in everything.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a great conversation. We want to thank you, both Steve and Jim, for volunteering your time and expertise over these many years to bring this relevant and timely information to our readership. So thank you for speaking with us today.
You're more than welcome.
Yeah, we're very welcome. It was a great opportunity to, number one, connect with Jim again. We used to see each other a couple times a year, but also just sort of reminisce about one's career and how a big part CLEAR was to creating a network of other like-minded psychometricians.
I agree with Steve wholeheartedly. One of the things that Clear used to have that I wish they would think about starting again is they used to have a column entitled "Testing Across the Nation," and I took over that responsibility back in back a few years, well, many years ago. But people such as Carr Schmidt, who was in the state of Michigan, Barb Showers in the state of Wisconsin, and of course I was here in Texas. We would actually poll testing experts around the country who are members of CLEAR about what was going on in their state or in their particular testing program. And we would assemble that information and write a column for each issue of CLEAR about what was going on across the country. And it was a very valuable tool in terms of finding out exactly what was happening, and you had at least a contact person to go to if, in fact, you had some further questions about that particular program. And it was a lot of fun. That particular column was extinguished a few years ago, but maybe the active CLEAR committee members could think about starting a program like that or a column like that again. So.
Yeah, and I agree. That was one of the benefits of all the different columns in the CER, that there's all sorts of topics brought up, and people presenting papers that Jim and I and the other folks would review, and it was a great educational opportunity to see how things were done by somebody else. You know, I think it was a great program when CLEAR decided to start sharing this information way back. Well, I guess as you said, in the late 80s.
Late 80s, early 90s, right?
That's a great idea. You know, in the interim, you know, we might be able to utilize our CLEAR communities, which I'll talk about that in just a moment. But I just wanted to say thank you guys for being a part of CLEAR for so many years. And it certainly has been a pleasure to talk with y'all today. You know, I also want to acknowledge Adrian Cadle and Sarah Winnick, who are joining the editorial board for CER. Work is currently underway for the summer 2021 issue. So we want to thank Adrian and Sarah for their new perspectives that they'll bring, and we look forward to the continued successes of the CER. A reminder to our listeners, though, you know, CLEAR members can also access issues online, and subscriptions can be purchased through CLEAR's publication page on the website. I also want to take a moment to thank our listeners for tuning in once again for this episode. You know, we invite you to continue the conversation through our CLEAR discussion forum, which is what I was mentioning just a moment ago. This podcast will be posted in the CLEAR communities, and members can reply to the post with their comments. And, you know, I'll pose a couple of little ideas, kind of seeds to plant. You know, kind of what challenges and innovations do you see in the future for licensing examinations? Maybe, you know, what testing and examination topics would you like to hear discussed at CLEAR events? We'd really love to continue this conversation on CLEAR communities. And we'll be back with another episode of Regulation Matters, a CLEAR conversation very soon. If you're new to the CLEAR podcast, please subscribe to us. We're available in a lot of places. On Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn, Alexa for Amazon Echo devices, iHeartRadio, Player FM Listen Notes, and Pandora. And I think Stephanie keeps adding more to every time we do this. So if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a rating or comment in the app. Those reviews help us to improve our ranking and make it easier for new listeners to find us. And also feel free to visit our website at www.clearhq.org for additional resources, as well as a calendar of upcoming online programs and events. Finally, I'd like to thank CLEAR staff, specifically Stephanie Thompson. She is our content coordinator and editor for our program. And once again, I'm Lyon Dempsey, and I hope to be speaking to you again very soon.